Everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Awesome. Hello, Eamonn. Looks like you had a wrong link, but all good. I think you're here. Let's just check your mic is working.
Me?
Awesome.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, perfect. All right, I think it's 1 minute after. It's probably time for us to get started. I'll get the recording going for anybody who's not here. By the way, welcome everyone. I can see a bunch of people there, and I'm sure that a lot more people are going to join. Welcome everybody. If you don't mind where you're joining from, that'll be good. If you just share it on the chat, like where you're joining from, that'll be a good place for us to start. But this is going to be a different conversation today. So we are not going to have a discussion or a presentation around some very specific concepts in platform engineering. We're actually going to have an amazing panel here, and I'll let the panel introduce themselves. So these panelists have got multiple years of experience, decades of experience within the space that we are talking about. My name is Ajay. If you haven't met me, I am one of the platform engineering practitioners in the community. And together with Mallory, we run what we call the platform engineering consulting team here. And we also have Rachel there, I believe. So this is not a panel where we're going to just talk about what is platform engineering, right? Which is where you hear a lot. So that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to take one more step further. We're going to talk specifically about how does platform engineering work within the BFSI space, the banking, financial services, insurance space. Is that different or is that the same, right? Because there is a very specific reason for that. We tend to hear a lot of things in platform engineering are about consistency and standardization. Yes, that is true. But how is that different? So that's what we're going to unpack today. So the way it is going to work is that you can also post your questions in the Q&A. We will actually go and ask the panelists those questions. But at the same time, we have a set of things that we will talk through. So to start with, without further delay, let's just do some quick intros. Maybe Jay, you can start with your intro.
Sure. Hi, Jay Moran. I love the head of platform engineering acronym, so I'll just say I'm the hope here at Fiserv. Fiserv is the central core banking and merchant acquiring and financial services supporter of many different banks and merchants around the globe. We do about 25% of the U.S., 25% of the global card transactions, about 40% of the U.S. card transactions, and about 3,500 banks in the U.S. So usually small and medium-sized banks, but we do big stuff too.
Also, you're being way too humble, Jay. So you're doing a lot of interesting things. I'm sure we'll unpack today. So, all right, Manu.
Hi, everyone. My name is Manu Sood. I currently lead platform delivery and operations at AvidXchange, which is a B2B payments company and AP automation. We serve roughly 8,000 buyers, 825,000 suppliers, and we process billions of dollars in annual payments. My scope has included platform engineering, site reliability, cloud operations, identity and access management, IT service delivery, and for the past 2 years, AI enablement and responsible deployment within the organization. My organization is roughly serving about 400 to 500 technology professionals, mainly developers and different other profiles, QA and automation. So I'm really excited about this topic because what I've really learned in my journey at 5 years at Avid is that platform engineering is really a business capability, and we really have to differentiate it from being an infrastructure team and that's how you succeed, especially in the financial services organizations.
That's awesome. And I would love to hear the kind of scale that you have, right? Because that is all this is, because pretty much all of you have that. So Eamonn, your intro, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Eamonn Ryan. So I lead a product development organization at Visa. So responsible for the engineering side of our issuing solution systems. A little bit of a disclaimer, legal disclaimer is I'm here. I'm not actually, even though I do work with Visa, I'm actually not representing Visa officially. My legal disclaimer. So everything I talk about is really my own experience in the industry. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, so
Wow, this is amazing, right? Because I was just thinking when three of you are actually, doing your intros, right? You probably have trillions of dollars of payment volume, like thousands of organizations, like tens of thousands of developers. The kind of scope that we are talking about between the three of you is just mind-boggling. So now, last but not the least, I don't think this is one person who needs any introduction at all, but Mallory, do you want to do a quick intro?
Thanks. Yeah, good to see everybody. There's some familiar names inside the chat too, so it's good to see you guys. My name is Mallory. I am the head of education and platform advocacy here at Platform Engineering Consulting, but you may see me around doing all sorts of other things. So I'm a full stack engineer by background, with a lot of experience in e-commerce and online transactions, both with real currency and non. Ask me about that sometime you see me. It's an interesting story. But yeah, I do a lot of teaching in the platform engineering space, and a lot of the folks here are probably familiar with me from that. And a lot of what I do is help teams do platform engineering to the best of their ability. And a lot of the time that comes down to understanding where their problems are. So no matter where you are, how much volume you process through your platform, through your engineering organization in financial services, there are common problems that we see come up, and there are all sorts of different ways of approaching the solution. So my job is to help guide you to that and to tell lots of silly jokes along the way.
Thank you, Mallory. So just to get the discussion going, what I did was I just launched our first poll. This would be a really great way for you to actually tell the panelists, like, what exactly would you like to hear? So you can see some of the questions and the responses coming through. But as we are really looking at that, one thing that is already jumping out is like, if you really look at what's that biggest thing that is slowing you down today, the overwhelming set of responses that we are seeing are like getting leadership aligned and funded. And who would have thought, right? That's the problem that we all encounter all the time. A close second there is the duplication, like every business unit solving it separately. So this is an interesting challenge, right? Because that's the reason why we started doing platform engineering in the first place, because we wanted to standardize. But now within the financial services space, I'm not going to name names, but there's think of the largest banks around in the US. So I know that some of the things that's happening there, right? Amazing place, amazing things happening, but I keep hearing that they have like 10 different solutions for everything that they do. Even if they have it like in a Kubernetes cluster, they have like 25 different ways of actually setting things up. So maybe that's where we will start the conversation from, right? As you really look at these things, right? And really try and scale this, what's that thing that is slowing you down really within the organization, right? Maybe you'll start with you, Jay.
Sure. The duplication of every business unit solving it separately, absolutely not my number one problem. If I could have answered, that's what I would have said. And so I think that manifests in a couple different ways. One is the challenge of looking for those universal problems. Like we are trying my best to do platform as a product here. Not all of our folks get that. They still love their tools. I love tools too. It's kind of a hard thing to get away from when you're an infrastructure type of person that's like, hey, I installed this thing. I can blame the vendor when something goes wrong. But it's really about the user problems we're trying to solve. And so some of the times when you look at a user problem as a central provider, you see like there's, in my case, 100, 200 different user problems that are exactly the same, but each of them have already chosen a different way to do it. And so when I approach them, they've already optimized locally for their particular, in their mind, like this is the only way we could ever possibly do this. And so that diversity comes at a cost of, obviously they've got resources that are spending time on work that we could have done centrally across multiple groups. They've got a problem, and Mallory knows this when I had her here teaching my team. She didn't see Jay one day. That's because Jay was up all night trying to solve a problem for a business unit doing something like they used to do it back in 2005. And those types of things, just it really, when you do not have that standardization across your infrastructure plane, across the way that development teams are deploying, then that really challenges both a platform team to build something that's useful for many different teams, but also from an adoption perspective for them to see, hey, look, yes, we're locally optimized. It's a good thing, but there's a global optimization as well that we can even benefit from. I can do things they'll never actually optimize for. And so that's the biggest challenge we've had. Overcoming it is just proving out the value proposition as anything else, right? And so once a couple teams start actually adopting, we don't have anybody on a full end-to-end golden path, but we've got lots of teams using several of our things that we've changed from a lot of different tickets into an actual, here's how you get this from now on. It chains all the DNS, all the load balancing, all the different pieces together for you. And now you get this thing that you needed. It may not be like I deployed my code and all I had to do was say, put it on Kubernetes, but we're getting there too. So I think both of these things are a little bit of odds. So diversity, definitely my biggest challenge.
Absolutely. I think you hit some really interesting points there. Manu, I know from your point of view, right, you have a scope, I mean, like a wide range of responsibilities, which is the part that every time I see, or we talk about it, the part that fascinates me is that how do you actually balance all of those things? Because in reality, what you see, again, if you look at that poll response too, in reality, what you see is that as you really try and go into any large enterprise which has been around for a few years, they have a DevOps team, they have an SRE team, they have all these things, right? So how do you actually bring in that culture of platform engineering and really try and make it sell there?
Yeah, I think great question. Ajay, when I started at Avid, right, we already had a DevOps team, we already had an SRE team, and we have multiple domains. For example, a payments domain, onboarding domain, a risk domain, treasury ops domain. So each of those domain product engineering teams were building capabilities on their own with slight variations. What we focused on is how do we make platform engineering a foundational capability that actually accelerates that DevOps practice and actually accelerates the SRE practice that's focused on resilience and operational excellence. So we looked at the undifferentiated complexities in the infrastructure, meaning you don't need different ways to manage your secrets, your APIs, your observability, your baseline CI/CD. Those capabilities are undifferentiated. Your differentiated value prop is what is the product capability or the customer value you're delivering or the customer outcomes. So let engineering and product teams own that, really focus on foundational capabilities with the deployment of these platform engineering teams that start treating these product engineering teams as their customers and build a roadmap that's informed by the friction that these engineering teams are facing or where they're getting slowed down by the infrastructure complexities that they don't need to worry about. So the positioning really was platform engineering is the foundation, and they're paving the golden path or the road for you. SRE is going to help you drive fast with those engineering practices, and product engineering teams own the business and the product outcomes and the customer outcomes. And that really sort of helped diffuse the people part of what Jay you were talking about, where engineering teams are like, don't take this work away from me because it's my autonomy. So we really had to balance that autonomy. Like, you still have the autonomy, you can build what you want to build, but it doesn't mean you have to build it alone and build it 50 times because we have 50 product engineering teams.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I mean, how we have actually gone about doing that. So, Eamonn, to you, the same question, right? I know that over your career, you have seen some really interesting challenges across multiple industries. I know you have lots of experience in the banking, financial services side of things, but you have looked at it from, let's say, as part of Google. I know you've been part of Google team for many, many years. You've done some really, interesting things, right? And even prior to that. So, how do you actually see this problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think of the different companies are different cultures, and a lot of, I think, probably the early on DevOps and kind of developer infrastructure kind of culture was, we're going to build it for you and you're going to use it. Whereas platform engineering is quite the opposite. It's more of a bottom-up type approach as opposed to a top-down type approach. And I see that very much so becoming a culture shift, right? As the platform engineers kind of look at the problems they're trying to solve, they can't do it in isolation anymore. You know, they have to kind of work with the end users, treat it as a product, right? And actually, kind of assess the business outcomes that they're actually making. So the impact and the success of a platform engineering team now is about not just did we build it and we had some adoption, but are we actually moving the needle on what it's supposed to do in the first place, right? So for me, over my my journey in this kind of working early on in DevOps type roles and into the infrastructure side and platform engineering, that to me is the biggest shift, right? And I think I'm seeing the fruits of that actually. Now that I'm leading more of a domain product development side of things, you can see it from both sides of things, right? Where you're not going to have your product engineers, your product developers even engage unless it's truly what they want, right? So to me, it's that culture shift over time.
Yeah, absolutely right. And no, you hit the nail on the head when you said that. A lot of it has got to do with that organizational DNA, right? I mean, that sort of brings everything together. So, one of the things, again, for those of you who don't know Mallory, one of the things that she brings to the table is that she actually sees these problems across so many different, organizations within the community, right? So, Mallory would love to hear. I'm sure the panelists would love to hear your perspectives on how do you actually see these things coming together.
I think one of the most interesting things, and sort of every single other person has thus far talked about it, which I think is quite important. I like when there's a strong convergence here. You guys are all talking about exactly what we need to be focused on, which is reducing duplicated, undifferentiated work. And I had a conversation with someone about this the other day, where it's like, hey, we need to keep teams autonomous where it's important. Give them that freedom and flexibility. It's that idea of centralization versus autonomy. It's about nuance. And I think this is in financial services something that people struggle with a lot. I've worked closely with Jay and his team on this. It's hard to sort of say, okay, where do we let people have that little bit of freedom in exploration while still not forgetting this like shared foundation of things like security and compliance, and our internal SLOs and SLAs if we have them. And I think that's the toughest part of the conversation in these types of organizations. One thing I also want to mention, because everybody's also touched on it, is that the metrics are shifting. What is success in platform engineering isn't about, tool rollout or just DORA metrics anymore, which is really, really nice to hear so many industry leaders talking about. And from a behavior perspective, this is really important. The teams I see that are successful are the ones that aren't just talking about sort of those, further reaching longer term metrics. It's the things that allow you to judge the platform by the business outcomes it drives and the impact they make against users, not just what they're building with it. And especially now when it comes to AI, this is so important because yes, we can measure throughput, but we also have to look at what it's enabling for the whole organization and make sure that we aren't, having some crazy trade-offs in there in the process. And making sure you avoid that does come back to that idea of what is centralized versus what is autonomous. Where do we allow flexibility versus, where do we lock it down? Bit of a long answer to that question, but I think kind of an important one.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, that's super important, right? And this is sort of establishes pretty much all the challenges that we see within this space, right? I mean, so that makes a lot of sense. So I just launched this next poll for those of you who are watching that. If you can respond to that, be good. So basically what we are asking is like, do you have a number for what your release and compliance process costs you today? Because this is something that we're going to drill deeper with this panelist, mainly because they actually live this experience, right? Because every platform faces that standardization question. I mean, we have gotten that out of the way. Now you pave a golden path and some teams love it. Some teams, they say that use case is special. I mean, you heard that, right? I mean, so mine's special, I can't do that. And in regulated environments, the stakes are much higher because compliance make that standardization easier to justify, but harder to get wrong, right? And again, if you have actually, before you all joined, we were talking about some of the books that's out there. So I recently wrote a book, and Jay told me that it's on his reading list, and I know Manu and Eamonn has both read it. So this is a statement right out of that. So we're just talking about like, how do you make sure that that whole compliance process is effective? So I want to understand like how all of you think about it. Maybe I'll start with you, Eamonn, this time. Like when you really look at the decisions that are driven by the risk and compliance versus the developer experience, like does regulation make that golden path conversation easier or harder? How do you see that?
Oh, if I had a silver bullet to solve all the overhead that comes with compliance in this industry, I'd be a very happy person, and I might even benefit financially out of it. I don't know, but it's I mean this even with the advent of AI findings, right, in the security space. I think we're all overwhelmed with like the load that it's bringing on us operationally, right? So platform engineering is primed to solve that problem. Um, Very much so. I don't know that many companies are doing it very well yet, but it has to happen soon because it's one of those other things that is like if we solve it at the core infrastructure level, it's gonna be a massive lift for developer productivity and developer cognitive load. Cognitive load is a huge part of this actually now that I think about it, because every finding that comes in is so different, right? And it could be some nuance that you haven't even thought about or hasn't even on your radar, especially with the AI type findings that we're seeing, right? Which are all great, right? These are all great things that for us to be fixing, and we have to fix it. But from a platform engineering perspective, I definitely think this is a golden path type opportunity, but not just on the generic, kind of platform solution, but very much so on a domain specific type solution, right? So if you're dealing with financial transactions and you have a security finding or vulnerability related to that, there is a golden path to kind of fix that within that very specific domain, right? Which could be very different to how you treat, kind of just general PII data or something like that,
Right.
or those types of findings. So I think platform engineering can elevate itself up into the domain space very much so to solve this. And if we solve it, well, it'd be pretty huge.
Yeah. And so I was just looking at the responses to the poll. The winner is most people are saying, or close to 50% of the people are saying, a rough estimate, nothing we would put in front of the leadership, right? And I shouldn't be surprised, but I'm surprised hearing that. What's your perspective on it, Jay? What do you think?
Oh, I was going to totally answer. Oh, I know exactly how much we said. However, as I sat here thinking about it, like that's a lie. What I don't know is the cost to the 8,000 developers sitting out in the field. I do know our cybersecurity cost. That's one of my peers. I do know my own cost for developer experience, which is primary vehicle there, and a couple other teams. So yeah, I know the central cost really well. Guess what? Mythos, if nothing else, is really in the last 6 months really opened our eyes to how far the impacts go when you have to rapidly increase your response rate, right? And so, we have some teams that are completely automated. They're doing refreshes of all libraries, everything, every single night. Other teams, when suddenly the Nexus firewall didn't allow them to use, a package they've been including for, 6 months, well, they had to take action right away if they wanted to get their next release out. It was a very different experience for them. And so the amount of calls some of our tooling teams got for like, hey, how come I can't use this anymore? Well, it's got a vulnerability. We're closing them all down right now. It's like you have 72 hours to get this done, or faster is for some stuff. It changed the game. So I won't say like I'll go back down to that. I got a rough guess, but there's another half of the equation I can't put a number on. And that's got opportunity costs too, which make it even worse. I mentioned like teams are trying to get features out the door to sign a client or to deliver, the next thing to the client so we can invoice the client for it. Well, guess what? That's not coming now because some remediation activities have to happen. So I'll back down. I won't be as adamant as I was going to be. I'll say it is interesting when you think about it back from the metrics perspective of things to look at. I'm looking at metrics both remediation metrics as well as cost metrics as well as Mallory. I will say I think it's still very valuable to look at time to market, time to revenue, we look at time to market as that new feature. Like we released stablecoin last year. There's the Rough Rider coin now that's out there for state issued coin. That took us a lot longer than we expected. It was all off the shelf internal technology that we're looking at for that, and I won't give all the numbers, but it's 2 to 3 times longer than we expected. And when I look at it, it's like, hey, these are all existing products. This is just integration work. Why did it take so long? And that's when it starts becoming evident of like, well, this team does this thing this way, this team does this way, this team does this way. And had we had more standardization on how we deliver, that platform could have delivered faster. Time to revenue for us is that next client and onboarding to an existing product. And we have to go through guess what? Financial systems are complex. So banks core banking platform and all the integration with all the surrounding platforms to it take a lot of times to work through. And so those are really long, complex things. So from the time we're contracted until the revenue comes in is a long ways away. So when I think about metrics, this is going back to a former question you asked right before. I don't remember how it's tied into this one, but I look at those metrics as they're still very valuable to us. How much my team impacts or doesn't impact is a little bit harder, but we can certainly look and just qualitatively, we do DX survey. So we leverage the get DX folks to really kind of ask people how they're doing. And we're seeing that slow but moving improvements in a few categories that are directly representative of what platform engineering offers. And our CSAT scores, same thing, going up and quarterly over quarter instead of down or flat. So those are all good things. So I can look and say, how are we doing in the market? Are we getting features out? Are we getting things done? Or is our quality improving as we standardize? And those are still important metrics to us, at least. But yeah, the compliance thing, I don't know.
I like the fact that you sort of tied both that internal and external feedback, right? Because that's important, and sometimes you don't think about that. So, Manu, that was going to be my question to you, right? I mean, so I know that AvidXchange is sort of embedding its payments platform into the third-party products, right? I recently read, I think, maybe in spring, read something AppFolio, Acumatica, and all that. I mean, it's all publicly available information.
We're now building products which are called accounts payable as a service that has embedded integrations into the ERP to be able to pull your invoices and then process your payments. So awesome. Really exciting stuff.
So as you look at that, when external developers start consuming that platform, right? Does this golden path conversation change there, or how does that work? So I'm looking at it more now from that external point of view, right?
I think it actually accelerates that integration and development because you've taken the time to standardize how you're going to create that developer sandbox in which that external third party is going to come and play. You've created well-defined documentation and API contracts. So the concept of self-service, where you're not having to spend weeks and months and sprints just onboarding this third-party integration, they can self-enroll and start testing out. And it's a lot of the investment that I think of it. The first 3 years, 21 to 24, were sort of build that foundation, and 25, 26 is what is accelerating Avid to go fast and build new products and capabilities and go to market fast. It has greatly improved developer experience too, because they're not just like chasing things or being distracted. That's the cognitive load, right? When you just have to address 10 different pings in 10 different Slack channels and 10 different developer teams trying to do things. So I feel like it's sort of it's slow at the beginning, and then you get the hockey stick impact of going fast, going in a standardized fashion. So the way I think about it is, once you've standardized the foundation, you can differentiate at the product layer, and that foundation actually accelerates business value delivery, your go-to-market, your customer outcomes, as well as your third-party or your partner integrations and their overall experience working with a team that kind of understands those modern software development principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. I mean, I really like the fact that you're saying, that's going to only accelerate that external pressure, right? Which sort of makes a lot of sense. Mallory, how do you see this? How are you seeing this in the industry as a whole?
Yeah. And this is one of those things too, where it's nice to see, I mean, you guys don't all perfectly agree. You have different scenarios to approach it with, but I see a lot of the approach to how we're thinking about compliance, how we're thinking about security as not second thought. It's not that afterthought. And what I'm really seeing from a conversational perspective is that people aren't thinking of it so much as this like separate gate that they have to bring in, but it's something that's actually just part of platform capabilities. One of the things I see where this all starts falling apart and where people really struggle is when they start thinking of solving the same problem 100 different ways. And I think compliance has historically been treated this way. It's one of those things where, self-service means we do it our own way, or we have that special sunflower scenario. And it's not to say there aren't, maybe domain-specific specifications. I think Eamonn mentioned that. It's not to say that can't exist, but the foundational piece underneath has to be the same. And when it comes to golden paths as a whole, it's their job to make this easy. It's their job to be compliant by default, make self-service the smart, easy way to go, lower cognitive load, but also make it easy to fix a problem if one pops up. And again, this is like a common thread discussion now, is if we can make that golden path so compliant by default, not only does it make us have an easier user experience from the self-service perspective, but hey, now we have something that we can really monitor, we can really audit, we can really track. And in these controlled industries, that's absolutely the most integral thing.
Yeah, I mean, so
I do think, Mallory, your point is very valid, right? These golden paths need to sort of have that embedded and built in rather than a bolt-on. Because a bolt-on is going to feel like a gate or an extra hop or an extra step, versus when it's built in the foundation, it just becomes part of the developer or the engineering workflow. It's just there.
It's a no-brainer. Make it a no-brainer and people are going to do it. If it has to be another checklist item, they're more likely to avoid it. And that checklist item is only as good as how documented it is. Yeah. So as to say, it's not often documented.
If you have a golden path that is compliant by default, people are going to use it because they want to avoid all that headache, right? So yeah, absolutely.
I think maybe the question coming up is similar of nature, but it also has to do, like, Eamonn probably got the same kind of problem I have with regulation, right? So PCI, that, like, I think we're all familiar with it. Some of us are familiar with, like, the levels of service provider that we have to deal with, which is a little bit more scrutiny than your normal PCI type of regulation, or not regulation, but industry standards. I will say for us, especially the Federal Banking Administration in the US, and I forgot the equivalent name in the EU, they have some very stringent standards and audits as well. So a lot of our time is just proving what we proved. And to Eamonn's point there's nothing better than having a path that already presents the evidence, all the artifacts needed to show that, yep, we had two exceptions. Those two exceptions went off the path. That's much easier than looking through, I don't know, good grief, 50,000 releases to understand out of 50,000 releases, now I find the two that were deviant, right? Like, that is so much easier for the folks who have already adopted a path and are using that deployment path with our, what we call secure software supply chain, modules that really provide all that evidence into our audit systems, right? And so that really kind of changes the game massively. Otherwise, it is a lot of humans talking to a lot of other humans in a lot of meetings, asking for copies of this and copies of that, and trying to figure out how to get it to them. And outside, consultants as well as inside, as well as government regulations. It's a really interesting industry. I say it, I've said it here, so I don't mind saying it. My first and only stop in financial services. It's a challenge. I've been here 10 years. I don't plan on going anywhere, but it's very eye-opening when you kind of work in this industry for a little while. And just the additional work, I call it administrivia, that goes along with the day-to-day work that you got to get done.
Yeah, I mean,
deadlines that
good.
Plus all the deadlines on remediation that comes with that, right? So
yeah, I think the point that you just made about so many humans having to care and feed that system that has to provide change control and compliance evidence, and then finding out the remediation and then closing out those gaps. I think with the platform observability, with the platform really serving as the control plane for those compliance and regulatory requirement, it eases everyone down, because now they know they have a dashboard that they can give to the auditor, or an easy way to get to that information that can show the exceptions, rather than go through this list of 50,000 things that you deployed, because you've got CI/CD and teams are continuously deploying. And I think in a regulated industry where you have to do this, sometimes monthly, sometimes every other month, it can be super overwhelming and a total time suck for multiple teams.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the next poll that I popped up there, when we were creating this poll, we are internally discussing. Yeah, I mean, there's no question which is going to be the winner, right? Everybody is going to say AI agentic delivery mandate. Funny enough, the responses are like, no, it is not. The top ones continues to be like the operational resilience DORA kind of metric, as well as the PCIDSS that Jay was talking about, right? So, which is essentially the reason why we are even having this panel in the first place, right? We are not really talking about what agentic is doing. We are really talking about how is platform engineering helping this whole process. So when it comes to the BFSI specifically within this industry vertical, one of the things that we know is that governance is not optional. I know all the panelists talked about that now, right? But the question is, does it really accelerate or slow you down? And I know Eamonn made some good points with respect to the fact that, yeah, I mean, if you have a good golden path that is actually going to take care of this, it's not going to slow you down. It's only going to accelerate that, right? I mean, so even if you can just build on that from your domain perspective, and I know that you have some recent work that has come out on the domain-driven platform engineering side of things. How do you actually look at that? What's that domain specificity when it comes to really looking at that governance?
Yeah, I mean, with governance, especially in our industry, right, there's a lot of it, right? So there's a lot of compliance, there's a lot of regulatory stuff that we need to do, and especially in the world of AI, you mentioned AI metrics. I think it's a bit of I think maybe people answered that, there are a lot of things are tracking is the metrics and everything, but a lot of it is towards more of an agentic way of working, and the whole industry is trying to do that, right? So when it comes to like both of those things combined, velocity enabled by AI in a world of high regulatory requirements, also high availability, multiple nines availability in this industry, especially on the online transaction type processing, use cases. It's a lot, right? From a platform engineering perspective and from a like domain specific application of that, I think their platform engineering is perfectly positioned to kind of help with very domain specific things to help with that acceleration in a safe way, right? So if you think about a transaction, or let's say even in the world of AI, right? And you're moving from the inner loop where we're just generating the code, right, to the outer loop where we're trying to safely push it to production, right? All that stuff in the outer loop, it's kind of, I'm surprised I'm not sure if you had any question on this for the audience, but that's probably the most unsolved part of the equation right now for the industry is that outer loop, doing that safely. And in our industry, I mean, it's the most important part. We can go as fast as we want in code generation, but if you don't push it safely to production, you're in trouble, right? But the thing about platform engineering in that space is that there are so many nuances that are domain specific, right? There are very specific compliance requirements for the type of data, or the type of, even down to the type of transaction that you're dealing with, right? We have all the different types of standards for transactions, and there's different things we need to check and different things we need to do for each of them. Even from a reliability resiliency perspective, there are parts of our system that can probably deal with maybe 99% of availability, but there's most of it is 4 or 5 nines, right? Availability, and how do you apply the proper guardrails, platform engineering enabled and created guardrails that apply to that specific domain in that outer loop. So yeah, long answer to your question, but to me, that's the biggest opportunity right now is that whole outer loop. How can we apply all these domain specific ways of working from a platform engineering perspective?
Jay, how do you see this problem? What Eamonn was talking about?
As far as 5 nines, I wish I had 5 nines. No, so I think when you start really thinking about like the impacts that you're having and how you solve for that, like the agentic stuff is a great example. And I'll say other key, especially card providers like Eamonn and like the number one competitor in ourselves included, we've all had our serious outages. We've also had many minor outages. And I will say over the last 6 months, it certainly seems a little bit more prolific than it has been in the past. I think, maybe in my case, I've gotten better. That's good. But that's a very isolated nature, like, for it's the acquiring side in the merchant space or on the issuing side, on the cardish bank side. Both have been relatively stable. Knock on some wood. I just cursed myself, I'm sure. But those are, it is harder now than it's ever been with as many changes as we're having to push through. Like our change volume has increased continuously over the last 2 years at a pace like we're doing almost double the change that we were doing 2 years ago. And which is really strange because we've shut down plenty of products, we've done plenty of things, and maybe that's a metric I'm not looking at well enough, but I don't associate that with my team, but maybe I should. We're doing more change now than we've ever done in the past. We're doing it more successfully than we've ever done in the past. But that impact to the world or, to the US or wherever metric you want to look at there is still greatly outsized. So I think understanding how those impacts are happening, how we're actually releasing there, getting that last, final touches to make sure you're achieving the highest number of nines you can in any given product is going to be pretty key. So don't know if I completely answered there, but like that's the way I think about it, because uptime and performance are, I think Manu mentioned, SRE roles. It's like we've never had really SRE specific roles here, but as you kind of look at how your platform provides, I hate saying SRE in a box or AI SRE, but a lot of those things come a lot closer to realization and actually are realized in several of our products today than they've ever been before. So before it's always been humans actually on those calls trying to get it back up and running.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the point you're making, right? You can't just rebrand an infrastructure team to a platform engineering and hope that, overnight you're going to get the results. The investment has to be made. And only because of those investments, right, agentic is possible now, because traditionally we built these platforms for human developers. Now, with agents doing code generation, test case automation, provisioning environments, or even making changes on behalf of developers, if you don't know what the agent is doing, what the approved templates are, what is their policy boundary, or you don't have audit trail under whose authority the change was made, or did it use an approved pattern versus did it go off rail, you don't want what happened with OpenAI agents going rogue. I think the platform then becomes the control plane for that responsible agentic development. And without having those investments, you cannot be successful with AI. You really have to have the basics in place in order to be able to even say, hey, we're going to crawl, walk, and run. You can't just suddenly start running and sprinting with AI.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, and it's within the inner loop as well as the outer loop, if you think about it, because even within the inner loop, right, we have agents, and I like to call them my engineers that I didn't actually hire, I didn't actually interview them, and they're quite unpredictable. So we have to put these put these guardrails in place, like even from a target architecture perspective, right? When you're generating the code, there has to be those kind of guardrails, and platform engineering can put those guardrails and golden paths in place, even from a target architecture perspective for code generation. And then you obviously head into the outer loop where you're pushing to deployment, and there's tons of stuff there that needs all those.
I always talk to my developers about guardrails and hard rails, right? Hard rails are security rails, PII and account numbers and all those things, right? We have AI gateways in place that are gonna, make sure that those things get anonymized or, but not even allow a developer to do it. So there are hard rails that have to be there for these compliant, regulated environments. And then there's guardrails that are gonna be architectural patterns or, things that are gonna ensure that you don't fall off and, find yourself stuck in a place where you don't wanna be if you're a developer wanting to do something for the business or your customer.
Yeah, so Mallory, in many of the courses that you teach, one of the things I've reused your materials to in lots of places, so talking about the escape hatches and all that kind of stuff, right? So when we talk about governance, is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is there somewhere in between that you'd look at?
No, governance is a good thing. Coffee o'clock. And I think the fundamentally most important part, though, is that governance isn't something we just think of now because there's agents in the loop. This is something we have to solve for humans. And this is something that takes not just, understanding what policy is supposed to be, but it also takes understanding the social conventions inside an organization, documenting those cultural implicit practices that we don't think about. And that includes things like, who do you ask when you have a specific problem? Who's the senior engineer that knows how to do this thing that, by the way, we should probably codify? These are the things that become part of and parallel to governance that are so important. And I actually just gave a talk on this last night. The fundamental thing that we all need to do as platform engineers is, not just say we're doing platform engineering, but actually do it, which means having human conversations and building a system that works and governs humans before we can throw autonomous actors into it. And I said this last night, and I'll say it again. If you feel like you're behind because everybody's bringing agents into things, don't worry. Because if you take your time, you build the platform first to serve humans very well, it becomes easier to scale that for agents. And the quote I always like to give, and I wish I knew exactly who said it at PlatformCon, but it was, if we can't even write a readme.md, how the hell can we write an agent.md? And that's how I'm always trying to think of this, because that is also a layer of governance, of context, and of knowledge. So, that's, if you're not thinking that way, I think you're making a mistake fundamentally.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we see, right? I mean, so a lot of organizations who actually skip that IDP part want to now jump on and go do something agentic because they feel that's very easy, right? I mean, and unfortunately, if you don't build your foundations right, that's going to be a problem. So I just popped the next question in here for you to start responding. Go ahead, Jay.
Just really quick, like what you just said, I think one of the best phrases I've heard coming out of you guys, platform engineering, and we even everybody else recently, is the amplification. All the agentic and AI is going to do is amplify what you have. And I think, especially for my case, where I have some teams that are very far ahead adopting our IDP and using it, and then other teams who are like, no, go away. Like you see that, especially like I was talking about the Mythos side, the teams that are already adopted, like they're amplified in how quickly they can respond and how less work it is, versus the teams who aren't, who are like, no, I can't do that. You're sending too much. Stop, please. And so I think that amplification of what's happening, it's a great analogy.
Absolutely. So yeah, again, so next topic I want to go to, we'll just look at the polls before that. So I think this is a really sort of an interesting question. It's not directly related to the topic we are talking about, but generally, right? I mean, our whole conversation today, what's that biggest thing that's holding you back, right? And I think a lot of people talk about it from a resourcing point of view, but this is something that we know. Sometimes resourcing problem is not just adding more people; it's about like having that smarter ways to do it, like Jay and Manu and Eamonn all have been doing, right? And that's the kind of things that we should really talk a lot more about, like how do we actually manage some of those things, right? So there's also some really good responses where we would benefit from external benchmark before committing. And this is something that is very tricky, right? Because if you go to our site, you can see some of the things that Jay's team has done, and it's all publicly available. And I'm sure that's the case with the Eamonn's book has got lots of information and the data around some of those things. Manu's work has been published a lot. I mean, so there is a lot of information out there, and you should definitely check out platform.org or talk to us if you want to have some very specific benchmark data. We have the community. We have about 300,000 people in our community who we talk to. Not all of them all the time, but many of them. So we do have a lot of data that we're happy to share and work with you all on that. So I'm very, very wary of going into that next question, but I can't do this panel without asking the question. So I have to ask it, like the AI, the agentic part of it. I know we briefly touched on it. So Jay, I know there is this public information about how this Devin partnership, that you had, and how you actually made it all happen, kind of thing, right? Maybe give the audience like a 2-minute version of like how did it all come together, and what was that real benefit for you, right?
Yeah, I will. How do I? Man, I should have used the Eamonn disclaimer up front. Is like Jay's opinions are not necessarily those of Fiserv. So I'll talk about it in a generic sense. So like the Devin AI partnership is a good example of where we are not going to place a single big bet, right? I think much like we have a diverse population of engineering teams throughout the company, we also have a diverse set of vendors, right? And so I think Devon is one of our key partners, and we're testing on some very important projects to modernize. Back to everything I was talking about, we have some things that are not as modern. We're leveraging Devon in a way that really is for those particular products to modernize them at the fastest pace possible to get some parity so that we can keep up, right, from a feature functionality perspective. So I'll say it like that. We have other partnerships. I think all the major players we have large partnerships with. We haven't necessarily saw complete advantage to any given one. So we have a few different ones we're testing out. Again, I think the nice thing is I didn't really talk about my scale. I serve about 8,000 software developers and about 8,000 other technologists. And personally, that ratio seems strange to me. There's about 2,800 in the area I'm in, which is infrastructure, and about, I don't know, hundreds, not to 1,000 in cyber. So there's about that many. And then there's another section of technologists inside the company that, have technology titles. They support those teams. They do implementations and that type of work. So with that many and around 800 dev teams, roughly, you do have the advantage of being able to try out things at scale for a lot of different teams. And so that's where we are. We do have a primary AI SDLC go forward that we're talking about, which really from that level is more about the compliance and quick remediation. And then from an individual engineering team, I won't say individual engineering team, an individual business unit of engineering teams, right? So we have about 12 different CIOs, 10 CIOs, regions, as well as main business lines. Each of those teams will probably take the kind of what my team and a couple other teams, cybersecurity teams, are producing from here's how we're doing AI SDLC here, and then they'll customize that for their particular one. So that includes some of the providers that we just talked about, but it also includes some of the tooling that the running on top of our IDP, but also is very specific tooling for that team from a kind of dev partnership with different providers. So a little different there, but we focus on it from the corporate level or the centralized level, mostly around remediation and why we need this now. And then from the actual individual, like how do we get the most benefits, the most bang for the buck for our development communities? They're looking at each of them because they have very different practices. I still have mainframes. I still have tandems. I still have Stratuses, AS400s. Like if you could name an old open VMS, I have a lot of different things that we support still. And well as more than half our developers are focused on modern stuff too. But we also do devices, the Clover units you see in the store. Like that's hardware engineering that happens here. So a lot of variety. So we're not going to say we're all things to all people all times, but we are, we do have a plan for
it. But it's a journey, like you said, right? And again, us being sort of really true to ourselves by saying, yeah, this is what we are really seeing, and based on some of the metrics that you're seeing, I think that makes a huge difference, right? So Manu, I know that you guys used to be more of those Azure shop and all that kind of things. So how's your journey coming along, and whatever you're allowed to share, right? I mean, so maybe give us a quick overview. How's your agentic journey coming along?
Yeah, I think we've come a long way, Ajay, since 2021. We are 99% in Azure and we have a small AWS footprint. But I think when we think about the amount of automation of infrastructure, standing up a FinOps practice, making sure we build platforms for the developers in terms of what they're trying to build and how fast or what do they really need from the platform. I think, we still have a healthy mix of teams that have monolithic code and monolithic deployments and products and a lot of modern software development. So I appreciate the comment about finding that balance that is right for the team and right for the organization. But I also think the investments in the platform and automation is allowing us to embrace AI-assisted development faster, because at this point, I do not believe manual governance is going to scale as the AI development continues. So what we are doing right now is looking at identity as code, policy as code, approved patents, and sort of taking that into our backlog and sort of codifying those into the platform itself, so that the high speed and machine-assisted engineering can be trustworthy, just like we were trusting the humans to do the right things with the hard rails and the guardrails. So I think the shift of making sure that, one, we know the agent and the agent identity, and then remembering that the platform can enforce those guardrails and hard rails and give you observability or exceptions when things are not compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a fantastic approach to doing it, right? So I know that we are almost at time. So in just 1 minute, I want you all to answer one question, right? I mean, I'm going to have the same question for all of you. So, like, if there is like one thing about how platforms work within your industry vertical, your BFSI space, for the next 2 years, what is it that you really want you to catch up to? Right? We talked about governance, we talked about agentic, we talked about compliance and all that. What is it that one thing that you want the BFSI to get industry to sort of catch up within that platform engineering space? I'll start with you, Eamonn.
I guess, I mean, it kind of touched on the previous topic, but on the AI space, right? A lot of what Jay mentioned, tandem, these mainframe is a thing, right, in this industry, right? And, I think we have massive opportunities around modernization in this industry, and AI can get there. And I think that's where we need to get to in the next couple of years as an industry. And platform engineering, like everything we just talked about for the last hour, is primed to help all that. So that I would apply modernization, AI, and platform engineering and principles to the big thing that needs to happen for this industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Manu.
I think I said this at the beginning, right? Agentic development makes platform engineering more important, not less, and allows us to move governance from something that the humans have to remember to do to platform enforcing that governance or embedding that governance in the platform itself. That's where I think that's what's going to differentiate the success for most organizations.
Awesome. And I don't know if anybody has seen Scale as much as you have, Jay. So, your perspective would be really interesting in this space. What do you see?
I'm gonna maybe deviate a little bit, but I'll say it's the human aspects of what we're talking about, right? Because I think along with those legacy, I'm not gonna call them legacy systems, our mainframes are actually extremely modern, right? We get new ones every 18 months. And we're actually applying, it's really kind of funny when you look at ZOS, IBM ZOS, that's probably further along on my modernization for using platform engineering technologies than some of my other platforms, some of my .NET stuff that's older, right? And the bigger problem I have is tenure in industry, not at a company too here. But it seems like I'm one of the few folks who came from the outside. I come from AOL, Vistaprint, by the way, prior to here. So more technology side of the house world. And changing how you work is an extremely hard thing, especially with the regulatory compliance aspect that's been drilled into your brain for a very long time. And I think we as platform engineering teams must, I love Mallory's concept of she's the platform therapist. And it's so accurate because that's what we all are when we actually engage with our users out there, because we're having to change what they know is like, this is the way that we're safe. This is the way that we comply. And you're asking them to really take a leap of faith sometimes, or at least be open to change. And that's something we all have to improve on and learn how to do better.
Absolutely. Mallory, bring us home.
Well, that's a big ask. The thing I will kind of say, and it's something that Manu said earlier, is that you can't just be an infrastructure team saying you're doing platform engineering. You have to invest. You have to invest in the mindset. You have to invest in the practice. You have to believe in it. And I think that's why, I get called the platform therapist, and you do now too, Ajay, because that's what we do. We are part of that system that helps you figure out how to make that change. And it is a hard change. It is a challenging thing. But at the end of the day, if the humans are comfortable, then the non-humans can be pretty comfy too. So yeah, it's a practice. It's a mindset. It isn't something you buy. It isn't just something you build. It is something you do and you believe in, no matter the vertical you're in. So that's how I'll close that out.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I know you guys are super busy. So thank you, Jay, Manu, Eamonn, for spending an hour with us. I'm sure this is going to be super interesting for everybody here. And thanks, Mallory, for being here. And thanks to everybody who joined. And everybody is actually going to watch the recording. And we will see you next month with another version of this panel. So thank you so much. Have a nice day.